I heard my name through the bedroom wall at 11:37 at night. Not loudly, not angrily, just casually, the way you'd mention needing milk from the store. Alan's voice, my son's voice, drifted through the thin drywall between the guest room where I'd been sleeping for the past 3 months and the master bedroom where he and Jennifer had their nightly debriefing sessions about the day's inconveniences. Mum's going to slow us down on the cruise. I had been lying in Robert's old robe, the navy terry cloth one that still held the faintest scent of his aftershave 4 years after his funeral, staring at the ceiling fan making its lazy rotations. The house was supposed to be temporary. Just until I got my bearings after selling the house Robert and I had shared for 42 years. That was in March. It was now June. Jennifer's response came quickly, efficiently. I know, but we can't uninvite her now. Can't uninvite her. Not wouldn't, which implies choice, conscience, some small measure of wanting. Can't, which is purely logistical, a social obligation managed like coordinating carpool schedules or remembering to put the trash bins out on Tuesday nights. I didn't move. I kept my breathing even, my body perfectly still in the guest bed with its floral duvet that Jennifer had selected from Target, the kind with big purple flowers that no one actually likes, but everyone agrees is cheerful. The kind of bedding you choose for a room that isn't meant for anyone in particular. She'll want to rest all the time, Alan said. His voice held that weary resignation I'd heard so often lately, the tone he used when discussing the broken dishwasher or the need to reseed the front lawn. She can't keep up with us anymore. And you know how she gets with the grandkids, trying to slow them down, making them sit still. Making them sit still. That was how he described me reading to Emma and Jacob on Sunday afternoons, the two of them piled onto my lap with their sticky hands and endless questions, the way children should be at 6 and 8 years old. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not dramatically, not like a tree splitting in a storm, more like ice developing a hairline fracture, so thin you might not notice it unless you were looking directly at the damage in the right light. They were talking about the cruise I had helped pay for. Not all of it, but when Alan had shown me the brochure back in January, glossy pages featuring turquoise water and white sand beaches, infinity pools and 5-star dining, his face had carried that particular expression of wanting something he couldn't quite afford. He hadn't asked directly. He never did. He'd simply mentioned the price, let the number sit in the air between us, and within that pause I had understood my role. I could help, I had said, for Emma and Jacob's tickets, a gift. His relief had been immediate, genuine. Mum, are you sure? I had been sure. At the time, I had been grateful for the chance to be useful, to contribute something to my family's happiness. I had written the check that same afternoon, $4,000 that represented a portion of the retirement savings Robert and I had built together over decades of careful planning and modest living. Now, through the wall, I listened to them discuss whether I should have a separate cabin, or if they could find a pull-out sofa somewhere, a way to contain me that wouldn't disrupt their vacation too severely. "Maybe she can stay in the kids' room," Jennifer suggested. "Emma and Jacob can share a bed. Mum can have the other one." "Mum?" She called me Mum now, had for years, though I'd never asked her to. It had felt presumptuous to correct her, ungracious to reject the title when she was extending what she believed to be respect. Now the word felt like a label on a filing cabinet, a category I'd been assigned, stripped of my name, my history, everything that made me Margaret. I was 73 years old. I had raised 3 children in a 2-bedroom apartment while Robert worked double shifts at the plant. I had gone back to school at 45 to finish my teaching degree, walking across that stage in a polyester gown while my knees ached and younger students cheered ironically for the grandma graduate. I had buried my husband after watching him disappear slowly into dementia, feeding him apple sauce and reading him the newspaper he no longer comprehended, holding his hand through every lucid moment and every confused hour. I had lived. And now I was a logistical problem, a burden to be managed, an obligation they couldn't uninvite. The conversation continued on the other side of the wall, but I stopped listening to the specific words. Instead, I heard only the tone: practical, efficient, resigned. The sound of 2 people solving a problem that neither of them had created and neither of them could escape. I looked at the ceiling fan, counted its rotations. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 5th rotation, I made a decision. It came quietly, without drama or thunder. It came in the space between one breath and the next, in the weighted silence of a house where I had been reduced to a guest in my own family, a visitor who had overstayed her welcome in a life she had helped build. I wouldn't slow them down. I wouldn't be anyone's burden. I would go on the cruise, but not with them. The laptop's blue light illuminated the guest room at 1:17 in the morning. I sat at the small desk Jennifer had positioned under the window, the one that wobbled slightly when you typed, and opened the browser. My fingers moved slowly across the keyboard, not from uncertainty, but from deliberateness. Each keystroke felt significant, like signing a document that would alter the course of something permanent. The cruise line's website loaded. I clicked on Manage Booking, confirmation number, last name. The cursor blinked in the empty field, patient, waiting. I entered the information from the email Alan had forwarded me 3 months ago, back when this trip had seemed like a gift, an inclusion, a sign that I still belonged in their lives beyond writing checks and babysitting when their regular sitter cancelled. The booking appeared on screen. 7 passengers, 2 cabins, 1 interior stateroom for Alan, Jennifer and the kids, one ocean view for me, squeezed into a single bed, a small porthole window, barely enough room to turn around. I studied the layout, read the description. 180 square feet. A bathroom with a shower you'd need to inhale to use. A desk that folded down from the wall. For 10 days I would have inhabited that space, grateful, trying not to slow anyone down, suggesting activities I knew they'd reject, offering to watch the kids while they had adult time, making myself small, invisible, useful. I clicked Modified Booking. The system asked if I wanted to change dates, passengers, or cabin category. I selected my name, removed it from their reservation. "Are you sure?" the screen asked. Yes. The booking updated. 6 passengers now, 1 interior cabin. They'd have more room. The kids wouldn't need to share a bed. Jennifer could store her 17 different hair products across 2 bathroom shelves instead of constantly reorganizing them to accommodate my small toiletry bag. I opened a new browser window, searched Cruise Ships Presidential Suite. The images that appeared were obscene in their luxury. Marble bathrooms with soaking tubs, private balconies spanning the entire width of the ship, separate bedrooms with king beds and Egyptian cotton sheets, butler service, priority boarding, concierge assistance with shore excursions. I had never stayed in a hotel room that cost more than $89 a night. Robert and I had honeymooned in a motor lodge off Route 40, celebrating with gas station wine and convenience store sandwiches because we'd spent everything we had on the deposit for our first apartment. We'd been happy, deliriously, foolishly happy in that cramped room with its scratchy sheets and the sound of the highway traffic that never quite stopped. But Robert was gone, and I was 73 years old, living in my son's guest room, listening through walls as my family discussed whether I'd be too much trouble to include in their vacation. I clicked on the cruise line's website again, searched for available suites. The presidential suite was listed. Available, 1 left, deck 15, midship, 1,800 square feet, private dining room, butler service, priority everything. The price appeared on screen. I stared at the number. $22,000 for 10 days. It was more than I'd spent on anything in my entire life except houses and cars. It was more than Robert's entire salary had been in our first 3 years of marriage. It was absurd, decadent, unnecessary. It was mine. I had the money. Not from Robert's life insurance. That had gone into a trust for the grandchildren's college funds because that's what grandmothers do, plan for generations they'll likely never see graduate. No, this was my money. My teacher's pension that deposited $1,100 every month. My portion of our retirement savings, the account Robert and I had built together, carefully, over 46 years. I clicked Book Now, entered my credit card information, The same visa I'd had for 20 years, the one with the sensible $3,000 limit that I'd never come close to reaching, because what did I need to charge that I couldn't pay for in cash? The transaction was declined. Of course it was. I called the credit card company, waited through the automated options until I reached a human voice, a young woman named Brittany, who sounded like she was reading from a script, even when she tried to sound sympathetic. "I need to increase my credit limit," I said. "May I ask what you're purchasing, Mrs. Holland?" "A cruise." "Oh, how lovely. Are you travelling with family?" Something in my chest tightened. "No. Just a moment." Keyboard clicking. "I can increase your limit to $12,000. That's the maximum for your account history and income level." "Not enough." "I'll transfer money from my savings account," I said. "Let me connect you to our banking department." More hold music, more automated messages reminding me that my call was very important and suggesting I visit their website for faster service, as if I hadn't already spent 45 minutes navigating their website trying to accomplish something that should have taken 30 seconds. At 2:38 in the morning, I completed the transaction. Presidential Suite, Deck 15, booked under my name only. The confirmation email arrived immediately, cheerful and impersonal, thanking me for choosing their cruise line and promising an unforgettable experience. I sat back in the wobbling desk chair. Outside, the suburban street was silent. The houses identical, their lawns uniformly maintained, their lives presumably ordered and uncomplicated. Families sleeping in bedrooms they owned, in homes where they belonged, where their presence wasn't questioned or calculated as a logistical problem. What had I just done? $22,000, more than half of my liquid savings. Money that was supposed to last, to be careful with, to leave as something for the kids after I was gone. Money that was mine. I had earned it. Spent 30 years teaching 7th graders how to diagram sentences and appreciate Poe, saved it. Invested it carefully in the boring mutual funds the financial advisor had recommended. Watched it grow slowly, steadily, the way anything substantial grows, with time and patience, and the kind of discipline that comes from understanding that security is built in small increments, not dramatic gestures. And now I'd spent it on a hotel room, a floating hotel room. I should have felt guilty, reckless, frivolous. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. I felt awake. The guest room, with its cheerful purple flowers and its wobbling desk and its walls so thin I could hear every detail of my family's private conversations, suddenly felt less like a prison and more like something temporary. A way station, a place I had been passing through without realizing I didn't have to stay. I closed the laptop, stood, walked to the window. The streetlights cast their orange glow across the perfect lawns. A car passed, its headlights sweeping across the houses like a searchlight looking for something worth finding. In 4 weeks, I would board a ship, alone, with a butler. And my son's family would be on the same ship in their crowded interior cabin, and they would have no idea I was there until I decided they should know. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't sad either. It was something else entirely, something I couldn't quite name, but that felt like the beginning of an ending, or perhaps the ending of a beginning. Quietly, I pulled Robert's robe tighter around my shoulders and went back to bed. The ship was larger than I had imagined. Not taller, I had seen photographs, understood the scale intellectually, but more present, more physical. Standing at the terminal 3.5 weeks later, watching it loom against the Miami skyline, I felt the true weight of what I'd done settle somewhere between my ribs and my stomach. $22,000. Priority boarding pass in my hand. No one to tell. Alan had dropped me at the airport that morning at 6 a.m., his farewell perfunctory and preoccupied. "Have a good time at Aunt Linda's," he'd said, already checking his phone, already thinking about their flight later that afternoon. They were flying from a different airport, their departure timed to arrive in Miami 3 hours after mine. I had lied, easily, cleanly. "Linda's looking forward to the visit," I'd said, which was technically true, though Linda lived in Phoenix and knew nothing about any visit because I hadn't told her about the cruise or the lie or any of it. The lie had cost me nothing. That was the strange part. I had expected guilt, some residual hesitation, but when Alan had asked about my plans while they were away, the words had come out smoothly, naturally, as if I'd been practicing deception my whole life instead of spending 73 years trying to be honest and good and the kind of person who deserved love without having to negotiate for it. Margaret Holland, a woman in a crisp white uniform with gold epaulets, stood beside me, smiling with professional warmth. Her name tag read Sophia Guest Services. "Yes? Welcome aboard. I'm here to escort you to your suite. May I take your luggage?" She gestured to the single suitcase I'd brought, the old burgundy Samsonite that Robert and I had bought at a discount store in 1987 and had used for every vacation since. It looked shabby next to the designer luggage. Other priority passengers were rolling through the terminal. "I can manage," I said. "Of course. But please allow me. It's my pleasure." She took the suitcase before I could protest further, led me past the regular boarding line, past the crowds of families and couples and groups of friends all shuffling forward in the heat, past the bottleneck at the check-in desk, where Alan and Jennifer would stand later, probably arguing about who had forgotten to print the boarding passes. We walked through a separate entrance, quieter, cooler. The carpet was thicker here, the lighting softer. "You're in the presidential suite on deck 15, Sophia said as we stepped into a private elevator. "You'll have your own concierge, Marcus, who'll meet us at your suite. He'll coordinate all your dining reservations, shore excursions, anything you need. You also have butler service 24 hours. Giorgio is assigned to your suite. He's wonderful. Been with the cruise line for 18 years. I nodded. Made appropriate sounds of acknowledgement. Inside, I was calculating. 24-hour butler service, personal concierge, private elevator. What had I done? The elevator doors opened onto deck 15. The hallway was empty, silent except for the faint hum of air conditioning. No crowds, no noise, no children running past with ice cream dripping onto pristine carpet. Sophia stopped at a door marked Presidential Suite in gold lettering, swiped a card key and held it open. Mrs. Holland, welcome home. I stepped inside. The suite was obscene. That was the only word for it. Obscene. Indecent. 1,800 square feet of marble and glass and polished wood spread out before me like some fever dream of luxury I'd never known I was supposed to want. The living room faced floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. The furniture was upholstered in cream leather and navy silk. Fresh orchids sat in crystal vases on every surface. The dining table could seat 8. The grand piano in the corner was actual wood, not veneer, and I found myself wondering who had decided a cruise ship suite needed a piano, and whether anyone ever played it or if it just sat there, symbolic and expensive. Through an open doorway, I could see the bedroom. King bed, more windows. A balcony beyond that wrapped around the entire corner of the ship. Sophia was still talking, pointing out features, the master bathroom with its soaking tub and separate rain shower, the guest powder room, the wet bar, the espresso machine, the sound system, the television that descended from the ceiling at the press of a button. A man appeared, distinguished and silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Mrs. Holland, I'm Marcus, your concierge. Welcome aboard. May I offer you champagne or perhaps sparkling water with lemon? Water would be lovely, I heard myself say. He disappeared into the kitchen area. Sophia excused herself with a card containing her direct number and an instruction to call if I needed anything at all, and then I was alone except for Marcus, who returned with crystal glassware and water that tasted better than it had any right to taste. Shall we review your dining reservations? He asked, producing a leather portfolio. You're confirmed in the main dining room for tonight at 8 p.m, unless you'd prefer to dine in your suite. We can also arrange seating in any of the specialty restaurants, French, Italian, Asian, fusion, steakhouse, all complimentary with your suite. I stared at the portfolio, at this man in his expensive suit asking about my dinner preferences, as if I were someone who regularly made such decisions. I need a moment, I said, to settle in. Of course, I'll return in an hour. In the meantime, Giorgio will be available for anything you need. Simply pick up any phone in the suite and press 0. He left. I stood in the living room, still holding my glass of water, looking at the ocean through windows that must have been 12 feet tall. The silence was different here. not the weighted silence of the guest room, where every sound from the rest of the house reminded me of my temporary status, my conditional belonging. This silence was expansive, chosen, mine. I walked to the windows, looked down at the dock below, where regular passengers were still boarding, filing through the terminal in their vacation clothes, excited and loud and normal. Somewhere down there, in a few hours, Alan and Jennifer and Emma and Jacob would board, would make their way to their interior cabin, would unpack their suitcases into the narrow space and figure out sleeping arrangements and probably argue about something small that would seem large in the moment. And they would believe I was in Phoenix. I took a sip of water, set the glass down on a marble side table that probably cost more than my first car. What kind of person was I becoming? Not a vengeful person. I didn't want them to suffer. I didn't want to humiliate them or make them feel the way they'd made me feel, reduced and surplus and only valuable for the functions I could perform. I just wanted them not to see me for 10 days. I wanted to be invisible by choice instead of by circumstance. I wanted to prove to them, to myself, that I could exist without being useful, that my worth wasn't measured in babysitting hours and grocery money and making myself small enough to fit in whatever space they could spare for me. I walked through the suite, slowly, methodically, opening drawers and cabinets, discovering amenities I didn't need and probably wouldn't use. Plush robes monogrammed with the cruise line's logo, slippers in a sealed plastic bag, toiletries in full-size bottles, not the travel sizes I'd carefully packed in my Samsonite. In the bedroom, I found my suitcase already unpacked. Giorgio, presumably, working with silent efficiency while I'd been standing in the living room having what was probably some kind of delayed panic response. My clothes hung in the walk-in closet, looking shabby against the mahogany and brass fixtures. My sensible shoes lined up on the floor. My nightgown draped across the bed. I sat down on the edge of the mattress. It was extraordinarily comfortable, the kind of mattress advertised in magazines I'd never read, promising restful sleep and the absence of pressure points. Outside the window, the ocean stretched to the horizon. In 45 minutes, the ship would depart, would pull away from the dock and head toward international waters, toward islands I'd only seen in photographs, toward 10 days that would either prove I was right to do this or confirm that I was a foolish old woman having some kind of crisis. The phone on the nightstand rang. I stared at it. 3 rings. 4. I picked up. "Mrs. Holland, this is Giorgio. I wanted to confirm you found everything satisfactory with the unpacking." "Yes, thank you." "Wonderful. I've prepared light refreshments in your dining room, fresh fruit, pastries, tea and coffee service. And I've set your formal wear for this evening in the closet. The embarkation dinner is semi-formal. Would you like me to return at 7 to assist with anything?" "No, thank you. I can manage." Of course, I'll be available if you change your mind. He hung up. I sat there, holding the phone, in a bedroom larger than the entire guest room at Alan's house, with a butler named Giorgio and a closet full of amenities and a dining room where someone had arranged pastries I hadn't requested. The ship's horn sounded, deep, resonant, final. We were leaving. The embarkation dinner was held in the grand dining room on Deck 5, and I almost didn't go. I stood in my suite at 7:45, wearing the navy dress I'd brought for formal nights, looking at myself in the full-length mirror. The dress was 15 years old, purchased for my niece's wedding, and it had fit better then. Now it hung slightly loose at the waist, evidence of the weight I'd lost living at Alan's house, eating Jennifer's carefully portioned meals and skipping desserts because she always made comments about sugar and aging. I looked old, not elderly. I'd never liked that word, with its connotations of frailty and decline, just old. 73 years of living, showing in every line around my eyes, every age spot on my hands, every silver strand in hair I'd stopped colouring 2 years ago because Robert had loved it silver, and after he died it seemed disrespectful to hide what he'd cherished. The phone buzzed. A text message from Alan, boarded. Kids are crazy excited. Hope Aunt Linda's house is quiet. Love you. Love you. 2 words typed reflexively, the verbal equivalent of blinking or breathing. I love you became, the letters typed automatically while thinking about dinner reservations or where they'd parked the car. I set the phone face down on the dresser, picked up the room key, walked out. The grand dining room was 3 decks down and aft, accessible by a central staircase whose railings were actual brass, polished to an aggressive shine. The crowd grew denser as I descended, families in vacation clothes, couples holding hands, groups of friends already loud with pre-dinner cocktails. At the entrance, a maitre d' in a tuxedo consulted his seating chart. Name, please? Holland. Margaret Holland. His expression shifted microscopically, a flicker of recognition or perhaps respect. Ah, yes, Mrs. Holland. Presidential suite. Right this way. He led me past tables of 6 and 8, past the crowd and noise, to a small table by the window. Just 2 seats, elegantly set with linens and crystal, positioned to face the ocean as the last light faded into dusk. Your table companion should arrive shortly, he said. Enjoy your evening. Table companion. I'd forgotten about that part. The concierge had mentioned it. Suite guests often shared tables with other suite guests, a way to encourage socializing while maintaining the exclusivity of priority service. I sat. A waiter materialized immediately with sparkling water and a wine list I didn't open. The ocean through the window was darkening. The sky streaked pink and orange, beautiful in that aggressive way sunsets can be when you're not in the mood to appreciate beauty. Is this seat taken? A woman stood at the table, 75 or maybe 80, wearing a green silk dress that suggested both money and the confidence to wear colours that didn't try to minimise or apologise. Her hair was white, cut short, and her jewellery was real, not costume pearls, but the kind of diamonds that came from marriages or inheritances, or simply having lived long enough to accumulate things of value. "No," I said, "please." She sat with the ease of someone accustomed to being welcome everywhere. Helen Barstow, owner's suite. This is my 4th cruise this year. Margaret Holland, presidential suite. This is my 1st cruise in 26 years. 26 years? She raised an eyebrow. Widowed, 4 years. 7 years for me. She opened her menu without looking at it, the gesture of someone who'd already memorized the options. Children? 3. None here? I hesitated. They're on the ship, different cabin. Helen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened with interest or understanding or perhaps recognition of a situation she'd seen before. Interesting. The waiter appeared with bread service. Helen ordered the Chilean sea bass. I ordered the chicken, then immediately regretted it, the choice seeming safe and boring, the default option of someone afraid to ask for what they actually wanted. "So," Helen said after the waiter left, "why isn't someone staying in a $22,000 suite dining with her family?" I almost lied, almost invented some story about surprise visits or scheduling conflicts or wanting one nice dinner alone before joining them tomorrow. The lie was already forming, easy and protective. "Instead," I said, because I overheard them saying I'd slow them down. Helen nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "And you were supposed to be here?" I helped pay for their tickets, then decided to come separately. Without telling them, she smiled. Not a sympathetic smile or a pitying smile, something sharper, more knowing. "Good for you." The dinner passed in conversation that felt startlingly easy. Helen had been a federal judge, had buried 2 husbands, had 4 children spread across 3 continents, and saw them twice a year at holidays that she now hosted at hotels instead of her home, because, as she put it, "I'm done cooking turkeys for people who only visit out of obligation." "They call you?" I asked, dutifully. "Every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, scheduled into their calendars like dentist appointments." She cut her sea bass with precise movements. "I'm a line item in their weekly routine. Check in with Mother, send birthday cards, make sure she hasn't died and left the inheritance in limbo." That's harsh. It's honest. There's a difference. She set down her fork. "Margaret, do you know what I've learned in 7 years of solo travel?" "What?" "That being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. I was lonelier married to my 2nd husband than I've ever been travelling by myself, and I was lonelier living near my children, attending obligatory Sunday dinners, than I am spending Christmas at resorts with strangers." The waiter cleared our plates, brought dessert menus. Helen ordered the chocolate soufflé. I ordered the same, making the decision quickly before I could default to declining dessert the way I'd trained myself to do at Alan's house. "They're going to see you eventually," Helen said. "On a ship this size, it's inevitable, I know." "What will you do?" I looked out at the dark ocean, the ship's lights reflecting on water that stretched to invisible horizons. "I don't know yet." "Well?" Helen lifted her water glass in a mock toast. "I'll be curious to see what happens, and if you need a co-conspirator, I'm in the owner's suite on deck 16. I have excellent champagne and absolutely no patience for families who treat their mothers like furniture." We finished dessert, exchanged room numbers, made vague plans to meet for breakfast or perhaps a shore excursion in the first port. As I left the dining room, I felt something shifting in my chest, the ice crack spreading wider, letting in something that wasn't quite warmth but wasn't frozen either. In the atrium lobby, families were gathering for the evening show, a musical revue advertised on glowing signs as spectacular and unmissable. I moved through the crowd toward the elevators, anonymous in the mass of passengers, invisible by choice rather than circumstance. And then I saw him. Jacob, my grandson, 8 years old, wearing his favourite superhero shirt, holding an ice cream cone that was melting faster than he could eat it. He was with Emma, the two of them walking without parents, probably sent to get dessert while Alan and Jennifer unpacked in the cabin. He looked up. Our eyes met. Recognition flashed across his face, surprise, confusion, delight, all cycling through in rapid sequence. His mouth opened. He was going to call out, was going to shout, "Grandma!" across the crowded lobby, was going to run to me with his sticky hands and endless questions. I held one finger to my lips, a secret. He stopped, looked at me with those 8-year-old eyes that hadn't yet learned to filter adult complexity, to pretend things were fine when they weren't. I smiled. Not the grandmother smile I'd worn in the guest room, careful and controlled. A real smile. A co-conspirator smile. Emma tugged his arm. "Jacob, come on. Mum said 5 minutes." He looked at his sister, then back at me, made a small zipping motion across his mouth. Our secret. Then he was gone, pulled into the crowd by Emma's impatient dragging, and I stood there in the atrium, my heart pounding with something between panic and exhilaration. The masquerade ball was on night 6, and I almost didn't attend that either. But Helen had insisted, had appeared at my suite that afternoon with a garment bag containing a midnight blue gown she claimed no longer fit her and a feathered mask that must have cost more than my entire wardrobe. "You're going," she'd said, brooking no argument. "You've been hiding for 5 days. Tonight you stop hiding." I hadn't been hiding, not exactly. I'd been observing. From the exclusive sun deck on deck 15, I'd watched my family navigate their vacation. Alan, red-faced and irritable in the heat. Jennifer, managing the children with military precision, her voice carrying across 3 decks when they ran too close to the pool. Emma and Jacob, fighting and making up, and fighting again, with the resilience of children, who haven't yet learned that some relationships can break permanently. They'd looked cramped, stressed. The interior cabin had no windows, no space to breathe, and Jennifer's careful packing had apparently underestimated how much room 4 people actually need for 10 days. I'd felt no triumph watching them, just a quiet confirmation. They'd wanted me somewhere else, and somewhere else is where I was. Jacob had kept the secret. I'd seen him spot me twice more, once at the buffet, once on a tender heading to shore, and both times he'd simply smiled and continued with whatever he'd been doing. 8 years old and already understanding that some truths are more complicated than telling or not telling. Now, descending the grand staircase toward the ballroom, I felt exposed in a way I hadn't felt in 5 days. The gown Helen had loaned me fit perfectly, which meant it was expensive and tailored and made me look like someone I barely recognized in the mirror. The mask covered the top half of my face, giving me both anonymity and the uncomfortable sensation that I was performing a role I hadn't rehearsed. The ballroom glittered, chandeliers and candlelight, and women in gowns that cost more than some people's cars, men in tuxedos, music from a live orchestra, not the canned playlist from the regular entertainment venues. This was the premium event, the one advertised in the sweet welcome packet as exclusively for our sweet guests and invited companions. Helen found me within minutes. "You look magnificent." I looked terrified. Same thing after 70. She linked her arm through mine. "Come, there's champagne and several eligible widowers who've been asking about the mysterious woman in the presidential suite. Helen, just dance with one. You don't have to marry them." A man approached, distinguished late 70s, wearing a tuxedo that suggested he'd worn many tuxedos in his life. "Helen, you promised me an introduction. Margaret, this is Thomas." "Thomas, Margaret. Don't bore her with stories about your golf game." She disappeared into the crowd, leaving me with Thomas, who laughed and offered his hand. "Would you like to dance?" I hadn't danced since Robert's funeral reception, when his brother had pulled me onto the dance floor in an attempt to make me smile. I'd moved mechanically, my body functioning while my mind was elsewhere, counting the people I'd need to thank, the casseroles I'd need to return dishes for. But this was different. Thomas was competent, leading without pressure, making small talk about the ports and the weather and nothing of consequence. I moved with him, remembering steps I'd learned 50 years ago, my body finding rhythm I'd forgotten it possessed. "You seem distracted," he said after a moment. "I'm sorry." "Don't be, but you keep looking at the entrance." "Expecting someone?" I almost lied. "My son! He's on the ship. Doesn't know I'm here." Thomas's eyebrows rose. "That sounds like a story." "It is." The music shifted, a waltz. Thomas adjusted his hold. "Do you want to tell it?" "Not particularly." "Fair enough." We danced. The ballroom blurred with movement and light. I closed my eyes just for a moment, letting myself feel the music, instead of thinking about everything it represented. When I opened them, Alan was standing at the ballroom entrance. He was staring directly at me. The mask covered most of my face, but he knew. A mother can see recognition in her child's eyes from any distance. He knew. Thomas felt me stiffen. Is that him? Yes. Do you want me to stay? I considered. No, thank you. He stepped back with a small bow, disappearing into the crowd with the grace of someone who understood when to make an exit. Alan crossed the ballroom. He wasn't in formal wear. The ball was suite guests only, and his family wasn't invited. He was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, completely out of place among the gowns and tuxedos, looking tired and sunburned and utterly confused. "Mom?" I reached up and removed the mask. "Hello, Alan." His mouth opened, closed. How you're supposed to be in Phoenix?" I lied. "You lied." He repeated it as if the words didn't make sense in that order. "You're on this ship. You've been on this ship the whole time."
Yes, in formal wear, at a suite guest event, the presidential suite.
His face went through several expressions rapidly: confusion, realization, shock, and finally something that might have been anger or embarrassment or both. $22,000. You spent $22,000 on a suite instead of telling us you were coming? Around us, people were beginning to notice, glance over, whisper. The scene we were making wasn't dramatic enough to stop the ball, but it was enough to register as something interesting. I kept my voice level, measured. "I heard you. That night, through the wall. You said I'd slow you down, that you couldn't uninvite me." His face drained of colour. "Mum, I'm not angry. I'm just done being someone you can't uninvite."
That's not. We didn't mean.
Yes, you did, and that's fine. You're allowed to want a vacation without your mother. You're allowed to find me burdensome. What you're not allowed is to treat me like I'm obligated to accept that and be grateful. The orchestra kept playing. Couples kept dancing. But in our small corner of the ballroom, time seemed suspended, waiting for whatever came next. "I don't know what to say," Alan said finally. "You don't have to say anything tonight, but tomorrow we should talk, really talk. Not through walls." I put the mask back on, turned toward the dance floor where Thomas had reappeared, offering his hand for another dance. "Excuse me," I said to my son, "I'd like to finish this waltz." The next morning, Alan came to my suite. He knocked at 8 a.m., still looking sunburned, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the buffet. I let him in, watched him take in the space, the piano, the marble, the windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, the ocean beyond. Jesus, Mum, the coffee is a nice gesture. I didn't know what else to bring. We sat at the dining table, the same table where Giorgio had served me breakfast every morning, fresh fruit, pastries warm from the oven, eggs prepared exactly as I requested. The same table where I'd eaten alone, peacefully, reading the ship's daily newsletter, and planning my day according to no one's schedule but my own, Alan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "You really heard all that? Through the wall?" "Yes. And instead of talking to us, you did this." "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. "That must have hurt." "It did. I'm sorry." I looked at him, really looked at him. My oldest child, 51 years old, grey at the temples, lines around his eyes. Still the boy who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd called me from college every Sunday without fail, who'd stood at Robert's funeral with tears streaming down his face while trying to deliver a eulogy about a father he'd loved deeply. "I know you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change what needs to happen next, which is..."
When we get home, I'm moving out, finding an apartment, something small, mine.
His face tightened. "Mum, you don't have to."
I do. I've been living in your guest room for 3 months, pretending it's temporary, pretending we're all just figuring things out.
"But we're not. You're living your life, and I've been trying to fit into the margins of it. That's not fair, isn't it?" I set down my coffee. "When was the last time you asked me what I wanted, what I was doing with my days, what I thought about anything that wasn't directly related to your family's schedule?" He didn't answer. "I'm not blaming you," I said. "I let it happen. I made myself small. I convinced myself that being useful was the same as being wanted. But spending 10 days in this suite, eating when I want, sleeping when I want, talking to people who don't need anything from me except conversation..." I remembered something I'd forgotten. "What?" "That I'm still here, Margaret. Not just Mum or Grandma, me." We sat in silence. The ship's engines hummed beneath us. Outside, the ocean stretched to a horizon that held no answers, just more water and more sky. "Come to breakfast," Alan said finally. "Family breakfast, in our cabin, just us." I almost said no. Almost explained that I had plans with Helen, a shore excursion we'd booked together. But I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the man who'd discussed me like a logistical problem, but the man who'd driven across town at 6 a.m. to take his mother to the airport, who'd said, "Love you," even if it was reflexive, who was sitting here now, trying. "Okay," I said, "but I have plans this afternoon." He smiled, just slightly. "Fair enough. If you're reading this, if you recognize yourself in Margaret, the person who always says yes, who makes yourself small, who measures your worth by your usefulness, know this: your silence isn't kindness, it's abandoning yourself. Your no isn't selfishness, it's remembering you're a person, not a function. You are allowed to want things, to spend money on yourself, to take up space, to be inconvenient, to require effort, to demand that the people who claim to love you actually see you. You are allowed to start again at any age." The ship docked in Miami on a Tuesday morning in late June. I disembarked with Helen, both of us laughing about something small, something that wouldn't matter tomorrow but mattered in that moment. Alan and his family had left earlier, through the regular passenger exit, after a dinner the night before where we'd all sat together in their cabin eating pizza from room service, and Jacob had asked if I was really coming home or staying on ships forever. Home, I'd said, but to a different home. My home. Emma had asked if she could visit on weekends. Jennifer had been quiet, which I interpreted as processing rather than anger. Alan had walked me back to my suite and hugged me at the door, tighter than he'd hugged me in years. I love you, Mom. Really love you. Not just, you know. I know. And I did. The apartment I'd already started looking at online was in a building downtown, near the library and a coffee shop and a park where I'd watched people walk their dogs during the virtual tour. 600 square feet. 1 bedroom. Mine. I had my savings, my pension, my health. I had decades of teaching that had given me patience and boundaries and the ability to recognise when a classroom or a relationship needed restructuring. I was 73 years old. I had spent $22,000 on 10 days of remembering who I was. Best money I ever spent.